Hi folks, this is Mike Dobbs, Managing Editor for Reminder Publications, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Government Matters. In this show, we take the crew on a road trip to East Longmeadow and the offices of Reminder Publications in order to interview Setti Warren. He is the former mayor of Newton and a Navy vet who served on Iraq, who is now seeking the Democratic nomination for governor, hoping to run against Charlie Baker in 2018. This was the first of several road trips here that we took in order to cover Nick Cochie's Sheriff's Picnic, where a lot of elected officials and candidates gathered. Okay, folks, this is Mike Dobbs at Reminder Publications. We're in our conference room, and we're doing a double dip today on the day that Sheriff Cochie is going to be inaugurating his version of the Sheriff's Picnic. With me today is Mayor Setti Warren of Newton, who is running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Mayor Warren, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be here, Mike. Thank you for having me.
First of all, I just want to give people an opportunity to hear you describe a little bit about your background, because I know that you have a very interesting background. You've served as a mayor of a Massachusetts city, so you've had to tackle all the problems and challenges that mayors have to tackle. You know, a lot of people say being mayor is the toughest job in politics because it's 24/7. And also you served this country in the Navy. You were in Iraq, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So you've got an interesting background. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you want voters to know about you?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me on. When I think about that question and the reasons why I got into this race, I really think about the events of this weekend in Charlottesville. I have two young children, 6 and 9. And my wife and I, on Monday morning before they went to camp, had to sit down with them and explain to them what had happened. This awful terrorist attack on people, promotion of white supremacy, explain to them why there are people in this country that have hatred for them or want to do harm to them because of how they look. This is one of the things I think about during this time period in this campaign. What kind of world are we going to leave for our children? And what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? We're in a critical moment in time. I believe in our country, certainly in our society, in our state. Three things really drove me into this race, and they have to do with my background. One, as you mentioned, is the time I served in the military, 9 years in the Navy Reserves, 1 year in Iraq. My father was a Korean War veteran. Grandfather, Battle of the Bulge, World War II. Second is my 8 years as mayor of Newton. I'm just finishing my last term, last year, at the end of the year. And last, being a dad and my family's history. About 10 years ago this fall, Mike, I was asked to go to Iraq for a year, coming up on my 10-year anniversary of my deployment. And I remember distinctly getting the call, and around that same time being informed that my wife was pregnant with our first child, my wife Tassie. And over the course of the deployment, they give you 2 weeks of R&R. And I had the opportunity to come home in the middle of that deployment. My daughter was born during that time period. Then I had to go back to Iraq. Two things I took from that deployment. First was an appreciation of the men and women that serve in uniform. Second was being embedded on a base with people that had nothing in common with me. People of different races, religions, backgrounds, different political ideology. We had to work together. We couldn't afford not to. When I got home in the fall of 2008, Mike, I made another decision to run for mayor of my hometown. And Newton faced at the time a $40 million structural deficit, 2 of the worst conditioned school buildings in the state of Massachusetts, no rainy day fund, 1 AAA bond rating that was in danger of being downgraded. Made a decision to run for mayor because I care about my community, wanted to get it on track. Won that election by 469 votes, knocked on 11,000 doors. Good old-fashioned grassroots politics.
Sure.
Since I've been mayor, we've eliminated the structural deficit. We are building 5 new schools in the next 6 years, 2 of which have already been constructed, 1 of which is being constructed now, the 3rd in line. We grew our rainy day fund to $20 million. That didn't exist. 2 AAA bond ratings. And I attribute this because of the approach we took to governance. One of the things I always say is, look, we got to be honest and transparent about where we're spending money, and our budgets have to be based on people, outcomes for people. The second is we have to have the courage to do things like raise revenue. Newton has a strong tax base, so I proposed a tax increase, property tax increase, because I knew we had a strong tax base. We needed to do it in my re-election year, March of 2013. We got those questions passed: schools, infrastructure, teachers, public safety. With 54% of the vote, I won my re-election with 72% of the vote. Same approach needs to happen on Beacon Hill. When I think about this, we've got to make sure that the budgets on Beacon Hill represent outcomes for people, and we can't be afraid to raise revenue at the state level. Let me just mention one last thing. I made a decision not to run for a 3rd term, Mike, because it's very clear to me that people and communities are falling behind in our state. This issue of economic inequality, I believe, is the defining issue of our time. When I think about this area, I think about the people that I've met over the course of the last several months. There needs to be a generational investment here in this state. It is not happening. And when I think about this question, I think about my own family story. Neither one of my parents grew up with wealth, Mike. They grew up in New York, Harlem, and the Bronx. My dad grew up in a tough neighborhood in Harlem, got out of that life by joining the military. He used his military benefits, Mike, to purchase the home in Newton, where I grew up with my 2 sisters, where I live today with my wife and my 9-year-old and 6-year-old with GI Bill benefits. This is a government-sponsored program, an investment for people of modest means so they can make ends meet and ensure their kids can do better than they did. That's not happening in the Commonwealth today. It's wrong. We've got to make sure that we have a budget that reflects our values. I proposed single-payer health care when I announced to address the cost of health care, one of the many issues proposals I've announced. I proposed free public college, another proposal to level the playing field, to allow people to get the skill set they need to be successful in our state. And we need to pass the fair share tax amendment, asking people making $20,000 a week, $1 million a year. That'll be on the ballot next year, same time as the governor. Reinvest that in education and transportation and infrastructure, badly needed right here in this region. Lastly, we've got to find a way, Mike, to work with one another, despite our differences, our political differences. Yes, we have to push back on all these policies coming out of the White House, all the toxic language that is being promoted out of Donald Trump right now. But there are people that voted for him that didn't vote for him for those reasons. We got to reach out to those people if we're gonna address economic inequality and leave a world better off for our children. That's what I learned on that base. We couldn't afford not to work with one another because we look differently, thought differently. That's why I'm in the race, Mike. That's why I believe at this moment in time, we need a generational type of leadership that's willing to make the investments that I talked about and bring people together all around this state, different regions, so we can have Massachusetts meets its full potential.
Let's double back on a couple of things that you just said, which are very intriguing to me. Let's talk a little bit about free public college. You go to many different European nations, and the state college system for them is open and free to people. And certainly, education is probably the best possible tool that people have to work themselves out of poverty, to work themselves into some place they really want to be. If you give people the opportunity, and you mentioned the GI Bill, my dad, who was career Air Force, used the GI Bill after he got out of World War II to go to college. So do you see this actually being affordable in Massachusetts to make institutions like Holyoke Community or STIC or Westfield State University, to name 3 in our region? Can we afford to do that?
The question is, can we afford not to, Mike? 21% of students nationally that enter higher education do not finish, many of whom end up with crushing debt. They don't have the skill set to make ends meet in this economy. Massachusetts has an incredible history of leadership and public education. I believe we need to reinvent public education now. 100 years ago, Massachusetts required people to read and write because they knew that in order for people to be full participants in their communities and citizens, they needed to have this skill set and also contribute to the workforce. Massachusetts also required people to have a high school degree because of the same reasons. Here we are in the 21st century. We all know that just having a high school degree is not enough in this economy to make ends meet. So if we know that, let's make sure we've done like we've done over decades in this state. Let's make sure we provide people with the skill set to be full participants in their communities and have the skill set that they need, that is required. So we need to, as a state, make a decision that we're committed to ensuring our people, again, outcome-based budgeting, which is something I did in Newton. These budgets are not just spreadsheets, outcomes that we need to ensure our people, our citizens, the people that I would work for, 6 million plus people, are ready to do that. We need to raise revenue, Mike, we know that. To do it, we've got to ask people doing really well in this economy. One of the first things we've got to do is pass the Fair Share Tax Amendment in order to reinvest that in education, make sure we have a quality public education system, state and community college that provides people with that skill set. And so as the governor of the state, if I am fortunate enough to represent you and work for you, I'm going to be looking to meet those outcomes. And I'm going to be asking people who are doing really well, again, in that upper income bracket, $1 million in that space, to pay more so that we can ensure we prepare our workforce. It's the right thing to do for the economics of the state, preparing people for the jobs that are going to be being created. It's also, there's a moral question attached to that, Mike. Again, what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be?
Right.
Are we okay with not giving people a skill set, people falling behind, people being crushed with student debt? It's wrong.
So let's also double back on single-payer health care.
Sure.
The reaction nationally to the complete and total failure of Congress to try to deal with this issue, I know that there's several governors now who are seeing this as if this can't be a federal solution, then it's got to be a state-by-state solution. And perhaps it might be states teaming up together to provide some sort of health care. Do you see, if you're elected, that you would have to face that kind of decision then with single payer, that perhaps what the future of health insurance reform in the United States is actually a state solution as opposed to a federal solution? So
this is how I look at it. You know, right now we have people making choices between paying a copay, going to the doctor, and making their mortgage or rent. We got people making decisions in this state between paying for prescription drugs or putting food on the table. Is this right? There are some good things about healthcare here in the state of Massachusetts. 97% coverage. We were one of the first states to, have universal coverage. We have incredible therapies and interventions on health, innovation. People come from all around the world in the state of Massachusetts. Those are good things. At the same time, we're one of the most expensive systems in the entire country. We're number 2 as far as expenses in healthcare. What we've got to do is create a system that is based on outcomes for people. The first thing we've got to do is make sure, and here are my 4 principles around this, individuals' health has to be the outcome for our healthcare system. Second, it needs to be accessible for everyone, no matter where they live. They live in Springfield, they live wherever they live, East Longmeadow, wherever they are. It's got to be accessible. Third thing, we've got to make sure that it is affordable. And fourth thing, we need to make sure we have the right kind of coverage. If we create a system based on those principles, we can really get at cost drivers, administrative costs and drug costs. This is where we can find savings. So I believe we need to move ahead now, to answer your question, Mike, right now. We can't afford to wait to see what's going to happen at the federal government, and we certainly can't wait to see what goes on at the state level. Two things happened in the last 6 months. You had President Trump and the Republican Congress propose to move 32 million people off of health care to address cost issues. Right here in Massachusetts, Governor Baker's solution is basically to do the same. Let's take people off the rolls. He proposed to move 140,000 people off of Mass Health to balance next year's budget. This is a system that is in reverse. It is backwards. We're actually, at the federal level and state level, you got a governor proposing to take people off benefits, make people less healthy. By the way, the folks that Governor Baker was going to take off of Mass Health are working people who are trying to keep their heads above water, some of whom have disabilities, some of whom are right on the edge right on the edge. It's wrong. So let's create a system that is not just efficient, but ensures that we're dealing and ensuring that the healthy outcomes for people. We've got to do it now. We can't afford to wait because of what's happening to our people.
I got to touch on two more things, and then we'll let you go because I know you have a busy day today. I'm going to be a selfish Western Mass patriot here and pitch for East-West Rail, sir.
You don't have to pitch for it.
Well,
I'm pitching for it.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that.
And it's surely not selfish.
You know, as you probably know, we've got extended commitments from Amtrak for North-South.
Yep.
The state of Connecticut is next May bringing its extended commuter rail to Springfield, to Union Station, which means you can get on a train and go to Hartford or New Haven, and then from New Haven continue on Metro North to New York City if you would like to. This is a huge economic development issue for us, and you probably probably aware that Senator Lesser out here in East Longmeadow has been pushing this.
It's a good friend of mine.
We need to have a
And he's
governor
right.
who's actually interested in this, and so far Governor Baker has been sort of not. So you are interested in East-West Rail, then? I take it.
First of all, I believe he is not. I don't think it's sort of. He has vetoed a
Right.
study that Senator Lesser, who's right on point for East-West Rail. This year's budget, it disappeared. We don't know why or what. This governor allowed it to or promoted that notion. Look, I was just here recently, 4 or 5 weeks ago, in Springfield. Had an incredible conversation with some business leaders, some commuters, also some working parents who need to get their children back and forth for medical care. And I'll tell you what I heard repeatedly in this roundtable a few weeks ago in Springfield. I heard that, number one, this area has incredible potential to grow from an economic standpoint. There's innovation, there's intellect happening right here in this region. If given the resource and right tools, we could really grow an incredible part of the state, this entire region. What is that? And I also heard that it is critical to have transportation be a part of that resource and toolkit. East-West Rail, as you mentioned, and you hit upon this, is an economic development tool. It also gives people the right to move around the state. We are inadequate and under-resourced as a state around transportation. This is a critical part. You mentioned north-south as well, rail and transportation, another essential part of growing the economy, strengthening making sure we promote the strengths of this region as well. This has got to happen. It's going to take honest, transparent leadership and budgeting that is based on outcomes for people, not based on shifting money around through gimmicks and tricks. I would add, Mike, on this issue, which is a larger systemic issue at the state level, the state of Massachusetts bond rating was downgraded for the first time in 30 years by Standard & Poor's. One of the things they cited was the gimmicks and tricks being conducted by this governor in Beacon Hill. Results are cuts in this last year: transportation, education, opioid addiction funding for the Cape, higher ed. all of which we've talked about a little bit today. We've got to be open, honest, and transparent about where we're spending money, how we're spending money. We got to close tax loopholes and exemptions that make no sense at all, or going towards things like transportation, economic development that we've talked about. And we've got to, we can't be afraid to raise revenue. We've got to ask people making $20,000 a week in this economy to pay a little bit more in taxes so we can make investments like we're talking about, East-West Rail, regional transit systems that make sense.
Okay, final question. I'm sure that you saw this, because obviously you're a bright guy, and you got a couple bright guys sitting over there working their phones as they're listening to you. Okay, so we had this national poll about how popular our governor is, and Governor Baker is the most popular governor of his peer group in the United States of America. So how do you run against the most popular governor? I mean, you've cited a number of things that you're concerned about with the Baker
Right.
administration and how things are happening. I mean, just the revelation about Standard & Poor's decreasing our rating is pretty heady stuff. But how do you run against a guy who supposedly is the most popular governor in America?
Well, first of all, one of the reasons why we're engaging this early, because these polls don't mean much. We're almost a year plus out. Let me tell you why I believe this campaign is important and how I'm going at this. I was in Great Barrington yesterday morning, went from Great Barrington to Pittsfield, from Pittsfield to Lenox, from Lenox to Williamstown, end of the evening in North Adams. I'm here this morning. Let me tell you what I'm hearing from people directly. I'm hearing people that are concerned about draconian cuts for their children in the schools, lack of transportation, regional transit systems. I'm hearing from people saying they've been waiting for broadband. I'm hearing from people saying they can't afford the cost of basic health care in our state. I'm hearing from people struggling just to find a good paying job where they can take care of themselves and their family. I'm having direct conversations. I'm listening. It's something that Governor Baker is not doing. It's something that Beacon Hill is not doing for this region, and it's wrong. I believe my approach to this campaign is engaging, making sure people know, introducing myself, what I believe, what my values are, that I believe we can do better as a Commonwealth. That I believe we can actually address these tough issues, the issue of economic inequality, very clearly and distinctly if we tell the truth. And that's the kind of campaign I'm going to be running over the next year and a half. We're going to be telling the truth about what it's going to take to get this done. Transparency in the budget, raising revenue, not being afraid to say that, making proposals that actually make a difference. Single-payer health care, free public college, fully funded K through 12, after-school enrichment programs in the summer, and after-school and an early childhood program, transportation like East-West Rail, matched with housing, growing high-paying jobs where people live. That economic boom should not just occur in the Boston area. It's got to occur out here, and we can do it if we're deliberate about it, and grow the small businesses that are out here, renewable energy and all the rest. So I believe it's about telling the truth. It's about saying, not just saying what we're against, as Democratic nominee, if I'm lucky enough to be that, but say what we're for and being clear about it and being honest about it. I believe over time, as we start engaging people, that we will be quite successful. I believe that as a state.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Mayor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And folks, this is going to be the beginning of our coverage of Sheriff Cochey's picnic. So stay tuned here to Focus Springfield.